Welcome to Rocky Mountain Marketing. I'm your host, Katie Brinkley. Join us as we dive deep with the world's leading digital marketing experts every single Tuesday. It's all about giving you the strategies that are working right now, directly from those who are making an impact. With my 20 years of experience, I'm here to help you navigate the world of digital marketing. Whether you're looking to sharpen your skills or transform your business, you're in the right place. Let's get started on today's journey to success. Welcome back to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. I'm sitting down today with somebody who has worked with Coca-Cola, Apple, Fortune 100 companies, and today's guest, we've been running around again in the same circles, hanging out online in the same circles, and it wasn't until a good mutual friend of both of ours said, "Why have you two not done a podcast together yet?" And when that happened, we both were like, "Man, why haven't we?" And it actually ended up being perfect timing because today's guest did just push out his brand new book. So you got to check that out. But before we even start talking about his book or any of the important things that he's been working on, I want to talk about how important it is to focus on your personal brand when you are running a business. And today's guest is Brandon Birkmeyer. And like I said, he is a former Coca-Cola and Apple media director. He's been doing this personal brand thing for over 2 decades. And we also love podcasting, Brandon and I. And I think that podcasting is one of the best ways to grow your personal brand because here we are. You tune in every week to hear the sound of my voice, and I bring in great guests for you to learn from. And this is one of the best ways to really get to know, like, and trust someone. So, Brandon, thank you so much for joining me on Rocky Mountain Marketing today.
Yeah, absolutely happy to be here. It's funny that you mentioned kind of the way you frame that, because for me, I started to realize that the best way for you to stand out and get noticed in the world is to build a personal brand. But I was like, what's the best way to do that? Because that's like a fluffy answer. And I was like, if I had to give you one thing, I was like, start a podcast. It's like such an accessible way to start figuring out, like, what are your perspectives? What are your ideas and thoughts, and meet great people and do all the things that I think are the foundation, the stepping stones to a personal brand. So I think we're aligned on that for sure.
Well, Brandon, I started my podcast, Rocky Mountain Marketing, during the pandemic as a way to continue networking. And the personal brand happened because of the podcast. I was so afraid of putting my face out there on social media. Yes, I was breaking all the rules and doing all the things that I was telling my clients not to do. But I was afraid to really kind of put my face out there. And it wasn't until I started the podcast that all of a sudden I realized I had to be the face of my business. What do you think with entrepreneurs that are a little bit afraid of maybe putting a face to their business? What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really common fear, right? I think all of us don't want to necessarily step into the spotlight, that there's a reasonable reason for not wanting to, because you are putting yourself out there to be judged. And not everyone wants to be judged. Not everyone wants someone else's opinions in their face. So I understand that reluctance. And I think that I talk about this a little bit in the book, but I think there's 3 types of reluctance. And this is just me being real with like how I've experienced things, right? When I started this, I said, man, do I want my name out there? Do I want people to see the things that I'm writing and saying? Like, is it any good? Am I right? Maybe I'm wrong on how I think about personal branding, about how I think about marketing. Maybe I'm wrong on some of these things. And I realized that it's okay to have good reasons to not want to do something. That's classic reluctance. It's, I don't want to because, right? Mm-hmm. And there's other kinds of reluctance that we face too. There's the kind that you're like, well, maybe it's okay, but I haven't figured out all the details yet, right? We get into that analysis paralysis. I call that thoughtful indecision. That's the second kind of reluctance, right? Yeah. And then the third is agreeableness. We're kind of like, well, just kind of wait and see. Like, what's the consensus? What do other people think I should do? And I think all of these things are there for a reason. They're there to keep us safe. They're there to protect us. But at some point, if you have a bigger goal, a bigger purpose, if you want to achieve something beyond your current status, you're going to have to take a risk at some point. And
Yeah.
for me, the best risk you can take is investing in yourself and sharing your ideas with others. Because what happens is sharing those ideas are going to attract people to you that are like minded. And yes,
Mhm.
some people are going to disagree and it might repel some people, but they weren't your people to begin with. And I think that's a good thing. I think we should have the people around us that believe in the same mission and purpose that we believe in. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but that's how I've experienced it for sure.
Well, Brandon, I think that we are at the time of this recording, the 2024 Summer Olympics is not that far in the rearview mirror. And exactly with what you said, I think that is one of the biggest reasons why people are afraid of putting their face out there is look at Ray Gunn, the Australian breakdancer. I'm not saying that, well, she's a better breakdancer than me, let's be real. But I mean, she put herself out there and then everybody has just destroyed her on social media. And that's something that I get nervous about still is, well, man, what if I say this or what if I push this out there and people don't like me? And it is something that, I mean, I think human is being afraid of having people judge you.
Absolutely. And here's what's funny about that story. And, whether it's true or not, what I've heard is like, this is someone who has a PhD in the breakdancing culture, who actually is good at breakdancing if you watch other videos, but managed to score 0 points, 0 points in the Olympics. And you have, in my mind, that is purposeful. And if you actually get into the story a little bit, this is someone who was trying to make a statement on purpose that said, you know what? B-boy culture, breakdancing culture is an art form. It's not something that we should be making into this points for hard tricks situation. It's an expression, it's an art. And in my mind, based on what I've seen them say, is that this was on purpose. And how awesome is it that someone expressed themselves, was willing to take that risk and say, I'm going to put myself out there on the biggest stage and put a point out there that's a little bit controversial, that maybe we shouldn't take an art form so seriously, that it's okay to be a little silly. And that's bravery to me. And I think that's the courage we should all have to see, maybe we piss some people off along the way in sharing our message.
Well, that's a great segue because I think if you are doing everything the same, it's really hard to stand out. Look at Steve Jobs. He wanted for Apple products to think differently. And I think that this is something that my husband and I have actually talked about. I feel like Apple hasn't really done anything differently since Steve Jobs died. They've kind of just been, I mean, I'm a Mac person. I have an iPhone. I got, the Mac. I mean, like everything. But I don't feel like they've done anything to really think differently since he's left. And that is, he was part of the brand. Like Steve Jobs was Apple, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. What I thought what they did was brilliant, because I don't think they've ever honestly been an innovation company. Even when you look at their product lines, they've always been like second to market in a lot of their things. It's true with their computers, true with their phones. They just made it really good and user friendly. But in their ads, they tried to paint this picture that was, hey, you're either the PC guy, the like boring, nerdy office person, or you're the creative, right? And creatives think different. And it's all positioning. Like, who are you versus who is someone else? And honestly, it ties back to what we were talking about. Like, they were really good at saying, here's who I'm for. I'm for the people that are more artistic, that are less professional, that let loose a little bit, that want to make something. And yeah, they definitely lost their touch in terms of, I think, innovating. They've moved from innovating to iterating, which is just, small and incremental revisions. But I wouldn't put it past the company with that much cash flow to like not come up with something new at some point. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think it takes leadership, and we'll see where that goes.
With having a business and being a business owner, how hard is it to find what it is that does make you different? And I think that that's where the personal brand will help your business stand out online.
Yeah, brand positioning is huge. And I think when you're thinking about it as a product, right? And marketing, it's actually easier because you know what your product is a very simple thing. It's got components, it's got benefits. As a human, we are very dynamic, like complicated creatures, right? Marketing a person is much more difficult. There's a connectivity trust thing that's much easier, but explaining to people what makes us us, that's like one thing. How difficult is that, right?
Yeah.
Because like I'm not just someone who talks about personal branding. I also talk about leadership. I also am a father, and I have a history with all kinds of different things and
You're a
volleyball and different.
podcaster, an author.
Yeah. So when I meet someone, I'm like, what do I tell this person that's going to be useful to them? And that story could change across 100 different people because that common ground, that thing that's relevant, changes. So branding a person is much more complicated, I think. But what I think gives me confidence is the more we could share our ideas with people, our beliefs, our values with people, the more we start to stand out as, I understand if that person's for me or not something that really aligns with me. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what it's about. It's about sharing those things. So expressing ourselves, I think, is one of the foundational parts of this, is getting yourself out there and sharing your ideas. Because guess what? When people are talking about you from afar, they talk about what they say in a room about you as your brand, right? I don't exactly agree with that, because I think if they're talking about you as like what you're wearing or like your charisma or your attitude or your style, that's gossip. That's not
Mm-hmm.
branding for me, a reputation for me. But if they're talking about your ideas, they're talking about, man, that thing that Katie said about LinkedIn the other day really got me motivated to take charge of what I'm putting out there online. Like someone talking about your ideas, huge reputation
Yeah.
building, brand building. And you got that, you might have made a change in someone's life. So if I'm trying to build my positioning as a personal brand, I'm doing it with my ideas. I'm trying to share ideas that help people and seeing if it actually makes an impact in someone's life.
Well, and that's what you talk about a lot in your book, front and center leadership, is how to stand out and stop getting overlooked and using your personal brand to help you stand out in a room. Obviously, that's going to be full of opportunities. It just depends on what you say and who hears it that connects with it. How do you think that whether you work in the corporate world or whether you are an entrepreneur, how you can stop from getting overlooked? Because I think that a lot of us, especially if we're just starting to find, again, I think this is where podcasting is great because it really helps you find what you're most passionate about and what it is that you really believe in, because you're talking to people about it every week. But how do you help people really find what it is that can help them stand out in a room full of opportunities?
Yeah. So I've wrapped my brain around this for the past 6 years because I had to do it for myself. And being in a corporate environment, I've been in a corporate environment for 17 years. And then I was in my own business entrepreneurship, trying to be a consultant for 6 years. So I've had two experiences with it. The first was in a corporate environment where you have experience that you're building, you have accounts that you're working on, you have skills that you're picking up in the corporate environment, and across those years I developed a resume, right? But that resume still had its limitations because it was still the corporation that decided when I got promoted or what my
Mm.
opportunities were to develop. And it wasn't built like it used to be, where you could be at a job for 20 years and you'd have this like assurance, this security that they would take care of you. It's
Yeah.
become a market where people are interchangeable. They've systematized everything where they can just take this person and replace them with this person. So as you start to feel that, as you start to feel like a commodity in a corporation, as someone that's replaceable, that may have to wait longer and longer and longer to get a chance to even pitch to have a seat at the table, right?
Yeah.
As that starts happening to you, you start to realize, man, the people that are at the top, they have more than a resume. They have these other things, which I like to call reputation, which I like to call a personal brand, which comes from a certain set of skills. And I didn't realize those skills for myself until I hit that wall where all I had was a resume and I went into entrepreneurship. And I realized there were three things that I was lacking.
And now for just a quick break. You've heard me talk about some of my favorite social media tools on the show, and one of them is a tool called Metricool. Metricool allows you to plan, analyze, and grow your digital presence all in one place. From websites to LinkedIn to YouTube, you can track everything that you're doing online and see just what's working and what isn't. Check out Metricool today at katiebrinkley.live/cool. Just a note, if you use the links I provide, I may receive compensation. All right, let's get back to the show.
The first was some authority. The second was influence in my marketplace. And the third was credibility. And to make those more specific and tangible, for authority, obviously you have experience at doing something, but you becoming an expert at it and sharing your ideas and really honing your opinion on something develops your expertise. And I think you can get to that through expressing yourself with content and content creation. And because you having to say it over and over again, you actually have to refine your ideas. That's the podcasting part of it, right? So I think there's an authority element that comes from content creation. The influence side is really that, like, who's your network? Who are the people that you know that would help you along the way? Who are the relationships you built 10 years ago that today are going to be that unlock that you need for the next thing? So that purposeful development of a community is what creates influence. And then the third, like I mentioned, is credibility, which to me is proof of performance, right? It's getting out there, making an impact by creating value. So authority, influence, and credibility are really the three solutions, if you will, that unlock this personal brand.
Okay, so let's say podcasting is not for whoever's listening today, and they're like, God, you guys keep saying like podcast. It's not for me, Katie. I'm not going to do a podcast. Brandon, stop. I'm not going to do a podcast. It's just not for me. I like listening to my podcasts. And again, if you're listening to this podcast, listen to Brandon's podcast, Brands on Brands. It's another great show. But what's another way for them to create content if they feel that podcasting is too much of a time commitment? Again, I'm just saying, putting this out there, it's not as much of a time commitment as you might think. I'm a huge podcast advocate, but if someone says podcasting isn't for me, what advice would you give them to help create the content that will help them find what it is that helps them stand out?
Yeah, well, first off, how dare you let them think that podcasting is not for them? I'm offended.
I know.
But I hear you. Well, in the book, when I talk about that thing that you're building with your content, I actually use the word platform. And for me, what a platform is, I call it a heroic platform for a couple of different reasons. But what a platform is, it doesn't have to be a podcast, but what it does have to have is a couple of things in common. One is that it has to be a place that is a place where you can categorize your knowledge, right? You can start to create something and add to it, and it's saved somewhere. So a blog does that, YouTube channel does that, a podcast does that. And there's other forms of like newsletters do that too. But a place where every time you create something where you share your opinion, it is now saved and findable and then organized and cataloged so people can say, okay, after 52 weeks of sharing something on your platform, someone can come in and say, well, who is Brandon? And they look up, what does he have to say about personal branding? And they can find 30% of these things that he put on his platform, these posts, these videos, these podcast episodes, talk about his beliefs around this thing. So that's my real, and it could just be your website. Like on your website, you're sharing in all kinds of formats. Maybe once you share an article that's 800 words, and then on the next thing you share an audio of you just talking or interviewing someone at a conference, or somewhere else you're sharing you speaking on a stage as a public speaker, that keynote talk that you built. So I think there's lots of platforms. And for me, I tried a lot of them. I tried blogging, right? And I was like, okay, I can type, but I kept editing and interrupting myself when I was typing. And I tried with videos and YouTube, and I wasn't quite ready for that yet because I kept worrying that I'm in my living room at my dining room table, like the background is like kids' toys in it. Like I was just very nervous about how that looked and how I was presenting myself. And the social media just seemed, it was too fast. It was like a post disappeared the next day and you couldn't really look for it. So for me, podcasting was the easiest and most accessible one, which is why I recommend it so much. Mm-hmm. Because you can start with the camera off. You can start with just a microphone talking about your thoughts. Or you can invite a friend on like Katie and have a conversation. And I feel like conversations are the most easy way that we communicate our ideas. It doesn't have to be an interview. It could just be you bring up a topic and you guys are sharing your ideas about that topic. So I think that reduces the pressure. Like we all know how to use Zoom now, right? You jump on a Zoom, you talk about your ideas. And here's what's great. At the end of it, you don't have to publish it. You don't actually have to put it out there yet. You can just do it 5, 6, 7, 8 times until you're comfortable with it. And you're getting into this habit of doing it and saying, you know what, maybe I'll just share a snippet of the thing that I had recorded that was longer today. But getting into the practice of sharing your ideas, I think is the most important thing. Like strategizing it and trying to think, what am I about? What's my positioning? And doing a whiteboard session. I think you're going to get trapped in the confusion of trying to make it perfect, but just getting out there and getting into the practice of doing it, you're going to find some clarity.
I like that you said platform, because it can be, I mean, it can be Facebook. It can be, you can have a Facebook group that you publish to. It can just be your personal Facebook page. It could be Twitter. It could be a newsletter. But having some place where you decide that you want to show up consistently. And the consistent thing is the part where you really, I believe, start finding what it is that makes you different. And you never know what it is that someone's going to connect with. It could be that I started by helping bands with their MySpace pages, and people will say like, oh my gosh, I remember MySpace. Or it could be, what bands did you help? Or I could say like, yeah, well, I was playing softball in college. Wait, you played softball in college? You never know what it is that's going to help someone connect with you. And then the more consistently that you show up, that's where your true fans are going to be. And you'll find your messaging, you'll have these true fans at the beginning, and then it just helps, I think, with your confidence to keep going. That's the hardest part, I think, for all of us as content creators, is the part of keeping going. And that's where you'll find your true personal brand and your tribe, I think.
Yeah, and I think you have to have the right reasons, right? I think, if you don't mind me interjecting, I think the idea is like, what is your motivation for this? What got you thinking like, I might want to create something? Like I might want to develop my personal brand. I might want to share my voice. Like, what is your motivation? What's your goal? Because I found that if the goal is, I want just more people to buy my stuff, or just an audience or fame, I feel like that's a goal that it's so hard to achieve right off the bat. Hard. But I think if your goal is, hey, I'd love to build those 3 things that we talked about. I'd love to share my voice in a way that helps me get better at talking about my ideas and builds a little authority. Or I'd love to network and make new friends. Like half the people I met on the podcast, I would have never met without having a show that built some influence for me. And I built some credibility because through the show, I came up with ways to help my audience that were resources and solutions to add some credibility to me. So I think getting into that actual, like, what is my reason for being here? What am I going to accomplish? If you change it to be, maybe this is just my way of doing a little bit of personal development and investing a little bit in myself, then it becomes a journey and not like this destination,
I think that a lot of people are afraid of building their personal brand and having it take away from the business. Does that make sense? If they're going to be investing this time to create something, is it hurting the business because they're the ones that are creating, again, that personal brand? What advice would you have to someone that maybe they're an entrepreneur and they have a successful business and they're afraid of overshadowing the business? Or 2, maybe they work for they work in corporate and they're afraid that HR or somebody's going to think like, oh, well, what are they doing here by posting and sharing all this stuff and building out a personal brand? What advice would you have to those people?
For the first group of people, the people who are out there who run their own business, not every business owner needs to focus on their personal brand. I'll say that right off the bat. I think some businesses, you're just fine. It's not going to change your bottom line if you didn't put a post out on social media today. I do believe that this doesn't have to be for everyone. Like I said at the beginning, I don't think this message has to be for every business owner out there, but I do think it's more likely for businesses where the face of the business is the owner, where relationships matter, especially service-oriented businesses, where a handshake and a verbal communication go a long way to like be the reputation of the business. I think, where your word is your bond, that kind of thing. I think those businesses, absolutely. Your customers want to hear from you. They want to feel like they get to know you. They want to know what your values are, what you stand for, and how you help, and what's your bigger purpose in that community, in that industry. So it's not for everyone, but I think it definitely helps service-based businesses. And especially if you're in the thought leadership space, where like you're a coach, you're a consultant, you're a speaker, you're someone whose ideas especially are the product, then it's huge. For people in corporate, I struggle with this too. I think what really it is, it's a fear, right? It's a fear of, is this going to get me in trouble? Is the corporation okay with this? And I think that's when you have to use some tact in deciding, what is it that I'm okay talking about? Like the message, like after you figure out your motivation, the message is the very next thing that you've got to get crystal clear on what you talk about and how it fits into your world, right? If I'm in corporate and I'm talking about like the things that suck about bosses, like I'm going to get in trouble for that, right? That might not be the right message for someone who's working in a job. But if you are doing something that elevates the industry, things that the industry would hire you for to talk about at a conference in your industry or an event in your industry, a little bit of thought leadership, like what are the trends happening? Where's the market? What is the new thing that we need to analyze? Is this good or bad? Right? In the marketing industry that I was in, like right now, AI is the topic. And getting to explore that and having opinions on that and sharing what the news is and what the new applications are of it aren't going to get you in trouble. In fact, I think your company would like to have you as a figurehead talking about these things, because it brings credibility not just to you, but to the business that you're standing in front of. Absolutely get some buy-in if you need it. If you need a little bit of permission, build some sell-through with the people at your organization that you know you have better relationships with. But at the end of the day, they really can't stop you from sharing something that's not controversial, that's on your own time. It might mean that you have to create this when you're home on your own computer so that there's no confusion over when you're doing your job or not. But I think getting past that part of it is the first step. What's your message and how do you fit this into your world? And then it's really, you got to ask yourself the question, like, am I interested in standing out? Am I interested not being in the middle of the pack? Am I interested in stepping out from that and having a little bravery so that I do stand out, so that I do get recognized, and that so they do say, you know what, we have a rising star in our organization and this person's it.
Front and Center Leadership is available now. Where can people pick up this awesome book?
Absolutely. It's available now on Amazon. So you can type in Front and Center Leadership and you'll find it. You can also go to brandonbirkmeyer.com and it's all over that page for sure. It's what I'm talking about the most right now. So happy to have some support out there for anyone who's looking for it. And also if you get the book right now, what I'm putting out there as book bonuses is for people who are just thinking, well, maybe I just do a little bit more on LinkedIn today, right? Just a little bit more on LinkedIn, and you haven't learned everything you need from Katie already. I have some 7 simple steps for personal branding on LinkedIn that are shared as book bonuses. And they're right there on that book page on brandonbirkmeyer.com. They're free. Even if you don't buy the book, you're welcome to access the resource.
Amazing. Well, absolutely pick up the book, Front and Center Leadership. Listen to Brandon's podcast, Brands on Brands, and connect with Brandon. Find him speaking at different events. He's at different podcast conferences. He's all over the place, but if you're in the North Carolina area, you might be able to run into him there. So, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us on Rocky Mountain Marketing today. This is an awesome conversation.
I've had a great time. Thanks for having me, Katie.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. I hope you're leaving with valuable insights and the inspiration to lead your market. If you've enjoyed our time together and found today's podcast episode useful, I have a small favor to ask of you. Please hit that subscribe button to stay updated with the latest episodes. And if you know someone who could benefit from these episodes, maybe a fellow business leader or an aspiring entrepreneur, go ahead and share this episode with them. Let's spread the knowledge and grow together. Also, I'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation beyond the podcast. Visit me at katiebrinkley.com to connect, to find more resources, or just to share your journey. And be sure to pick up your copy of my new book, The Social Shift, at katiebrinkley.com/book. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Katie Brinkley, and I can't wait to dive into more strategies and stories with you on the next episode of Rocky Mountain Marketing. Let's keep on taking your marketing to new heights.